Welcome to another episode of the Relationship Toolbox, a show about the skills we need to build healthy relationships with others. Marsha and I are interested in how you, when you are having a serious disagreement or a conflict with someone who is close to you, how do you handle that? What do you do when the way you see the situation and the way the other party sees the situation is totally different, or the action that you want to take is in opposition to the very action the other party wants to take? Social scientists who have studied human behavior have decided that there are two basic responses that we have to this type of conflict. The first is we tend to attack the other person by saying, "Oh, that's crazy. How could you believe something like that?" Or "You're just being dishonest." Or other things that are perhaps a put down of the other party. The second way we typically can respond is to avoid or to retreat. And that's where we're saying to ourselves, "Oh, I better not say what I really feel or how I view this situation, because if I do, the other party is just going to start a fight, or that may be too damaging to the relationship, so I better stay quiet." Both responses, attacking and avoiding or retreating, are not really helpful in dealing with conflict of this nature. So today we're going to be talking about another option to attacking or avoiding, and that is negotiating.
First, there are some misconceptions about what negotiation is and what it needs to look like. And I think when I think of negotiation personally, I think of like hired guns that are appointed to negotiate a contract or a union settlement or maybe a sales transaction, and they're there to be strong. They might be affiliated with the cause, but they're really designated as that front runner to work against the other person. And so we can think about it as being winning and outmaneuvering the other person and trying to defeat the other party. And that a good negotiator is somebody who's hard-hitting and tough and unrelenting. Or that you have to choose between being a hard bargainer and just capitulating in order to give in to maintain the relationship.
Right. It's one or the other.
Yeah. Or that you have to be cagey and you can't reveal what your true interests are because you don't want to be vulnerable to the other side. So, and some people just think, okay, so we're going to deliberately compromise between what I want and what you want. And so I'm going to exaggerate what I want so that I don't have to give quite so much up, and that I have these predetermined strategies and targets. And it doesn't have to be that way, because basically negotiating is any time when the parties are directly engaging with each other without the help of a third party.
Especially in personal relationships.
In personal relations, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we don't need to think about it strictly in these high-profile ways where it is negative and difficult. So,
and I think another point that we need to recognize in this thing is that there's a difference between problem solving, where we do brainstorming and we're really choosing among options that are acceptable to us.
Pretty
one
palatable,
way or the other.
yeah.
And it's just sort of setting a priority of one or the other, versus negotiating, where we really have opposing points of view and opposing actions that we want to take, that we are passionate about. So let's use an example, Marsha, so that our audience can begin to relate to this in terms of a concrete situation. Let's take the situation of a couple, let's say, been married for quite a few years. Yeah. And each year, the husband in this case has about 10 days during the summer to have for vacation time. And so each year the same issue comes up: where are we going to go? And for the last 5 years, the wife in this case, she's just been so adamant about wanting to go to Hawaii. They have friends in Hawaii, and ever since she was a little girl, she wanted to go there. And each time she's brought it up in the last 5 years, her husband, who has a more aggressive style of negotiating, has put it down. And she, being more of an avoider or appeaser, has said, all right, we'll do it your way. But this year is different. She's tired of feeling the resentment and the frustration of her desire to do something being put down, being ignored, and being discounted. So she wants to do it differently, and she knows it can't always be your way. It has to be something that also takes into consideration my desires and so forth. I can't live with this kind of decision making every year about our vacation.
So this is clearly more than just brainstorming or weighing different choices that are available to them, that they can mutually decide what the pros and cons are. We've got emotional, high-stakes investment here. And this has to be resolved, and maybe there needs to be some adjustment in the negotiation behaviors so that you don't just repeat the same cycle. So we need to address the emotions and the intense commitment and investment in one position or another. And without acknowledging that aspect of it, you're not going to resolve this. And it is going to continue to be resentful and hurtful to at least one party.
All the more reasons why those misunderstandings of negotiation that you talked about earlier cannot be used, because they're not transparent, they're not honest, and they're manipulative.
It doesn't have to be strategic. You really need to be present and focused and listening in the negotiation to steer it in the right direction. So the first step in learning how to be a good negotiator is to recognize your own personal style and who you default to in conflict. We've talked about conflict modes in the past, but particularly in this one-on-one interchange negotiation. So we negotiate things every day that have different levels of urgency. And we, depending on our personalities, depending on whether we're easygoing or whether we're competitive, we may choose a position. And I think sometimes in our most intimate relationships, we are less reflective about having to be kind, and it's counterintuitive. But in our most intimate relationships, we get to show up with our real self. And sometimes we forget that, yes, we need to nurture this as well. It's not going to necessarily just be static and always there. And we might need to kind of recalibrate our negotiating style.
It's not always easy to look in the mirror and see our own negotiating style.
Some other factors that can be factored in is like just not only who we are in our personality, but who we are physically. You know, like somebody who's large may just always have that essence of domination towards somebody who's smaller and more recessive. So you have to know who you are and how you're showing up as a negotiator and kind of look at that.
So basically, going back to those two styles we talked about at the beginning, we have to know which style we might be more inclined to use and how to counter that. If we need to. So let's take a look at the characteristics of someone who might be more in an attacking or competitive style with someone. There could be variations of this. And also, we aren't always in that style. Sometimes we use it for one situation and a very different style for another. But let's take a look at...
And if we do it, if we're one person in a public setting, it may sometimes be hard to turn that off in a personal setting too as well.
There could be a different investment in there. So some of the characteristics that we can look at as someone who might be inclined to attack or compete certainly is the need or the feeling of being powerful and in control. Because if they aren't feeling that, they can feel vulnerable. And that's not very comfortable for someone who has to be in control. So they're protecting themselves sometimes from that sensation because their thinking is that if I'm not tough and hard on this thing, I'm going to be used. Someone's going to take advantage of me. They feel sometimes more significant, more important when they are acting superior to the other party. And sometimes they can downright feel pleasure in dominating someone else.
And sometimes I think people who are used to fixing things feel like that's their role, their job. And they, from their perspective, they can see what's better.
Yes.
Without taking the other person's considerations into.
Maybe they don't want to be fixed.
Yeah.
Also, the person who is using this style is more inclined to dictate one way of looking at something and just find it very difficult to accept anything other way of looking at it. It's their way, basically, and how could you see it any other way?
Yeah, because it's so clear to them.
Yes, yeah, it's clear this is the right way. So they tend to be inflexible, intolerant, and impatient too. They want to get, as you say, they want to get it resolved right away.
And it's not that they're bad people, it's just that they can so clearly see their self-righteous truth.
That's right. And this may be the way
they wanted you to understand it too.
Yeah, this may be the way that decisions were made in their family of origin.
So often that's where we get our training.
Yes.
Either from our personal experience or from our family of origin, and we mimic that. That's all we know.
Some people, we've talked about this too, when we talked about the parts of the brain and the amygdala and how it can react. Some attackers actually use anger or rage to try to create fear in the other party so that they can get their way that way. They can be stubborn and demanding and argumentative.
Yeah. So by contrast, if you're the person who usually wants to avoid things and just preserve the relationship, but then you may harbor that resentment, you might be entering a negotiation with a low self-confidence that you can manage this conflict. So you're a little more reticent to enter into it.
Or outright fearful. Sometimes we've encountered clients who've been in a panic even to be in the same room with someone who negotiates in an aggressive way.
Because of their past experience
Yes.
and the physical response that you have to it. You might just really want to be accepted and to please, and that may be your default. And so you're not going to be comfortable walking into conflict. You may want to protect yourself from criticism or rejection, because you may know some truths, but you don't want to reveal them or talk about them in this conflict. So you think you're going to just avoid it.
Right, or there's no point in arguing because the other person's never going to see it another way anyway.
It. Exactly. You may come with a sense of defeat before you even start. Even if you feel a conviction about the righteousness of your perspective, you just know you're going to lose before you start. So you may also be idealistic and naive and not, think that it's all going to be rosy. And that people should behave in a different way, but we're all different. And you may just feel, I'm going to be vulnerable, I'm going to be taken advantage of this, I don't want to do this. So you could postpone decisions, you could postpone conversations, and just be less likely to enter into it. So what we have said before is that preparation is important.
Yes.
Because if you just try to wing it, either at your instigation and initiation, or you're just receiving this happening to you by the other person's bringing it up, and you're not prepared, of course you're going to repeat previous behaviors.
And react.
And react
Just
and,
react.
and be triggered. So with a little bit of thinking ahead, what hasn't worked in the past? How have I been? What have I brought? And what could I maybe change? And forethought can make all the difference. So what kind of preparation would somebody who is normally on the offense
And
bring?
aggressive in there? Yeah. And again, this is not easy preparation because it is looking in the mirror a little bit about
saying, what have I contributed to this habit?
Yes, how am I making this worse? So part of that is that recognition that you talked about. I have to acknowledge and recognize what style I'm using. If I can't do that, then you can't really change what you don't recognize.
And you do have to have an investment in the relationship as well.
Yes.
Whether it's business or romantic or
Right. If we negotiate for something in the store over a price or something, we're not having a relationship with a
Right.
person, we'll go for it with it. So the next thing is to think about what do I want to accomplish in this negotiating? What is my purpose? And if my purpose, which typically is in more aggressive style, is to win, to convince the other of my rightness in
At
this.
what cost? Well,
Yeah. What is that? Yeah, that's going to cost me. And is that really what I'm going to be helpful? If that's what I've done in the past, we need to learn from that that's not successful. So I need to change my purpose.
In the short term, it may feel successful, but in the long term, in the big picture, it's not.
Right.
Yeah.
So the other thing is to replace that concept of winning, that, haha, I won that, see how successful I was, how good I was at doing that, to more seeking mutual gain. How can we both walk away from this saying, wow, that was really a respectful way of being treated and treating the other party, and I really like the solution that we came up with. Certainly, as you mentioned before, emotioning or recognizing the emotional triggers, that can really be helpful if before in this preparation you say, well, when she
happens.
looks at me that way, or when she turns away, or when she rolls her eyes, or when she uses this inflection in her voice, or when she says whatever, boy, does that ever trigger me with it. So to acknowledge, okay, what could I do differently to control my emotions so that
And my behavior. Yeah.
Yes, which will then change the behavior. To be aware of, which we probably feel but not necessarily have cognitively thought about, what is the style that the other party is using on me? So if I'm competitive and my partner is using a competitive style on me, whoa, that can really be difficult. If my partner is an avoider and I'm a competitor, obviously I need to change some things too to make it work better. So
both, yeah.
Yeah, acknowledging where is the other party coming from too. Identifying the emotions. We've talked about that in almost any interchange with somebody, is that we need to become not only aware that we are emotional, but what are those emotions? So if we're being triggered with anger or resentment or fear, to acknowledge that. And we've talked about the fact that often anger covers over, it just clouds
other emotions,
feelings of being vulnerable and hurt. And as you mentioned too earlier, thinking sometimes about what are the short-term versus the long-term consequences of it. In the short term, maybe I might win. In the long term, I might lose the relationship. If year after year, or incident after incident, my partner is feeling put down and not having a voice.
Yes. Yeah.
I need to keep an open mind to any other point of view other than my own.
That's hard.
Yes.
That can be hard.
Yes. And I need to use restatement, so that we've talked about that before saying, well, my point of view is, after we've listened to the other party, restate in our own words what we think they have said to us.
I think that is so seldom used, because we may do that internally, but we don't give the gift to the other person of restating it back for them to clarify or to recalibrate.
Using questions in place of dogmatic statements. I heard one person say once, we need to talk in question marks, not periods.
Or exclamation points.
Yes, right. We need to focus on creative solutions and ask enlightening questions. Sometimes people ask a question, but it's almost an accusation. So the questions is really find out, how did you get to that point, or what is really behind that desire that you have? Take time out to recover from an emotion. If you really find, boy, I've been triggered now, take some time out.
Let's come back to this,
And using the language of negotiation. Just using these words can sometimes change our approach. Words like, would you be willing to? Could we agree to? May I make a suggestion? Can you think of another solution? Or what would your ideas be? That throws the conversation into much more of a collaborative style. And finally, staying committed to the process. So often we say, oh, I know it's going to happen now, and we just drop it.
Drop it, yeah.
We need to continue with the negotiating using those skills, so we're not just repeating the same thing over and over.
Even if you're taking a time out
Yes.
You need to signal that you're still committed to it, that is not an abandonment. It's just like, let's cool off and come back in a couple of hours. So the preparation that somebody who's an avoider might take would be to decide what posture they're going to take. Am I going to continue to be an avoider, or am I going to walk a little bit into that assertiveness, not necessarily aggression or attacking, but just protecting my position and my goals and my desires.
What behaviors are putting me into that avoiding category?
And what do I want to accomplish? What is my goal? Because you can cater to reaching that. And again, is it long-term or short-term? In this scenario, we've been talking about my goals have been long-term because I've wanted to nurture, this character has wanted to nurture the relationship, but at some point she wants to assert her short-term goals as well. Now, we could talk from the I message that we've talked about so often. Instead of accusing, just this can be so informative to the other person. When this happens, I feel this. So when you discount me, when you dismiss my needs and my suggestions, I feel kind of mistreated, and I don't feel important.
Yeah.
And not debating, just talking about from my perspective. You could also say, if you anticipate it being heated, be prepared to say, when you raise your voice, I can't hear what you're trying to say. Could you, and then ask, could you speak to me in a calmer, lower voice? And to understand where your limits would be in terms of the back and forth, if it does go down that way, as it has before. Say, why don't we table this and come back to it when we have cooler heads?
Right.
And when
restatement is also a wonderful way
Restatement
to
is-
avoid argument, so that if somebody comes back with an argument and you come back with restating what their argument is, they don't have anything to push back against.
They feel heard, they
Yeah.
feel understood. You're not necessarily agreeing, but you're showing them that you've heard them. So they
Yes.
don't have to keep at it. You don't have to keep persuading you. You should also measure your body movements,
Yes.
and they should match your tone. There's a lot of study about, you can build your confidence just by changing your posture sometimes.
And that can be a trigger for the aggressive person when they see that avoidance posture.
Yeah. And also, again, using that negotiating language of,
Yes.
would you be willing to, could you listen to my point of view? Would you consider, or what would you offer? Now that we've both heard what the other person's position is, what do you suggest?
Yeah.
And if it goes well, express appreciation because you want this to go well again some other time. So let's return to our initial scenario of
Okay.
kind of in this conflict about where to go on vacation. So
If you take the role
I'm going to
of-
take the role of the avoider,
And I'll be
you're
the aggressor.
So
Okay.
I'm going to start off with an I message, strong but not accusing, and say, when you ignore or overrule my suggestions to go to Hawaii, I feel discounted and dismissed. I would like to have my ideas considered with the same seriousness as we have considered your ideas. Would you be willing to keep an open mind about going to Hawaii this year?
Look, Marsha, I'm not ignoring your request to go to Hawaii. I just think, I know there are more exciting and accessible places to go than Hawaii, and it's so expensive.
Okay, so this is a place where my character could reflect back what she just heard, instead of going right back into rebuttal. So,
Or retreating.
or saying, okay, here we go again.
Yeah.
So I'm engaging with a reflective statement. Okay, I hear that you're thinking that there are more exciting places to go than Hawaii, and that it's a great distance to travel. Would you be willing to just listen to my reasons for wanting to go there without interrupting and without making comments?
All right, I'll listen. But I'm telling you right now, it's not going to change how I feel about this.
Okay, so here's another place where she could take the bait and comment on that reluctance to even participate.
Right.
But
He's still trying to use that power.
Yeah.
And the thing, there's no point in you
and
doing that.
like
So.
you're defeated from the beginning. So I could say, first of all, I've been asking you for the last 5 years, and you've said no each time. And I went along with your suggestion. Second, I haven't seen our friends that live there, that moved there for 7 years, and I really miss them. And finally, maybe you don't remember that I have been wanting to go to Hawaii since I was a kid, since before I met you. And who knows how long we're going to have good health and the resources to make this kind of trip. I think it's only fair that after 5 years, I get to go to the chance to go to Hawaii.
Well, I can see this is important to you, but I can't believe it's been 5 years that you've been trying to do that. I still don't want to go there. But I'll tell you what, I get 10 vacation days, so how about we'll take 5 and go to Hawaii, and then the remaining 5 we'll go do another place where I can really relax and enjoy myself.
I hear that you're trying to compromise with me, and I appreciate that. But this is not a situation where I think compromise is going to be good enough. I have for the past 5 years taken your entire 10 days on your vacation choice. I think it's only fair that we spend the entire vacation this year in Hawaii. And besides, you've pointed out that it's quite a distance, so if we're going to travel that far, we should make it worthwhile and stay there. Would you be willing to grant me this year?
That still doesn't seem right, when after working all year long, and I only get 10 days of vacation, that I deserve a vacation where I can relax and I can just feel comfortable.
So again, I would maybe restate and then assert. There's no question that you work very hard and that you deserve to relax and have a wonderful vacation. I wish there were a way that you could imagine that happening in Hawaii. However, if you're convinced that you can't and there's no way, I understand, and I'll arrange to go with my sister instead. I just need to know your decision in a reasonable amount of time, let's say 2-3 weeks, so that I can make an alternative arrangement. So I appreciate you listening to my point of view, and I hope you've learned something.
So this points out a different way of negotiating too, that sometimes not talking and just letting the person have time to reflect on this for a day or so can also be a type of negotiating.
Right, right, because they can percolate on it.
Yes.
And you can continue it, yeah. So what we're seeing here in this example is that there's a different style. One person, and sometimes 2 people, if they're both committed, can change, and it's enough to change the system. And it was respectful. The avoider did not have to become an aggressor. She just had to find some devices, think ahead, prepare, and imagine it, maybe even rehearse it, know what the triggers were, and behave differently in order to get the goal and the outcome.
And in her preparation, set up the option with her sister, so that would be an option.
So it was hopefully with less resentment. It might be a win-win, but at least it isn't a win-lose.
And it might be a way that I, as the aggressor, would begin to see things a little differently.
And hopefully we have disrupted this contention so that maybe it will not be a catalyst for further demise in this relationship.
The cycle of the conflict has been broken at least,
So, thank you for joining us today again on the Relationship Toolbox. We hope we've given you some strategies for reevaluating how you are negotiating conflicts in your personal relationships. We'll see you again soon.